On a freezing winter night, a 18-year-old black boy was biking through the streets, making deliveries, just hoping to earn enough for one more night at the boarding house. As he hurried to finish his last order, he saw an old woman standing by the bus stop, lost and shivering. He hesitated. This delivery was his last chance to keep his shelter, but kindness won. He turned back to help her. What he didn't know was that the woman was a billionaire and that one small act of compassion would change his life forever. Before we dive deeper into the story, tell me, where are you listening from? And don't forget to subscribe so I can share more heartwarming stories with you tomorrow. In the final stretch of winter, when the cold had worn itself into the bones of the small town and people hurried along with their heads tucked into their collars, Marcus rode his mother's old bicycle as if the wind itself were chasing him. He was 18, thin in the way that struggle carves a body down, and determined in the way that law sometimes teaches far too early. His fingers were stiff around the handlebars, his breath rising in small clouds that disappeared into the gray evening air. He had one delivery left, just one, and if he made it before 9 o'clock, he'd have enough to cover his rent for the week. It wasn't much, just a room with peeling wallpaper and a window that whistled when the night air slipped through, but it was shelter. It was a door that locked. It was something his mother once promised he'd never lose, and he was trying hard to keep that promise alive. The road ahead stretched long and empty, winter-worn and cracked. Marcus leaned forward, pushing past the ache in his legs, imagining the warmth of that small room, the faint comfort of having a place to return to. Each rotation of the pedals seemed to carry the weight of every night he'd spent alone since she passed. Every mile on that battered old bicycle was another piece of the life he was trying to build from the fragments she left behind. But just as he turned onto the main road, he saw her. An elderly woman stood by the bus stop, thin coat, hair all confusion and wind, her shoes dusted with frost. She wasn't moving. She wasn't even looking around. She simply stood there, staring down the empty street as if waiting for something that had forgotten her. Marcus slowed, instinct tightening in his chest. He told himself to keep going, because he had to. Because stopping meant risking everything, the room, the warmth, the fragile stability he'd fought to hold together. But something in the way she wavered, as though the cold itself was trying to erase her, tugged at him. People passed by in their cars, eyes fixed ahead, not seeing her, or choosing not to. She was one more figure swallowed by winter. One more person the world had decided to look past. And Marcus, shivering, exhausted, late, felt that old echo in his heart, an echo of the countless times he himself had been unseen. He pressed the brakes, breath catching in the cold, and let the bicycle coast to a trembling stop. That was the moment everything changed, though he didn't yet know it. Marcus rested one foot on the cold pavement, trying to steady his breath as he studied the woman more closely. Her hands trembled slightly, fingers curled inward as though holding onto something invisible. Her eyes were unfocused, not lost in the way people misplace directions, but lost in a deeper, quieter way, as if the world around her had slipped out of order. He cleared his throat softly, unsure whether to speak. He didn't want to startle her. He didn't want to get involved. Every second he lingered here pushed him closer to losing everything he'd worked for that week. Yet the longer he watched, the more a heaviness pressed against his chest, a familiar weight that came from recognizing someone else's quiet struggle. "Ma'am," he finally said, voice gentle. "Are you waiting for someone?" She blinked, as though resurfacing from a distant thought. Her gaze drifted toward him, not quite landing. There was something fragile in the way her lips parted, as if she were reaching for a word she had just misplaced. I'm trying to get home," she murmured. "The bus should have come by now. But I can't remember. I can't remember if this is the right stop." Her voice had a softness that tugged at something in Marcus, something tender and familiar, the echo of a memory of helping his mother find her breath on the days the world pressed too hard on her. Still, a part of him pulled back. He glanced at the sky, darkening into early night. Time was slipping. His deadline was slipping. His rent hung on the thinnest thread. "Do you know your address?" he asked. She shook her head slowly, frustration tightening the corners of her eyes. "I used to. I had a card, somewhere. But everything feels so foggy. A gust of winter air swept past them, lifting the ends of her thin scarf. She shivered, so subtly that someone rushing past might have missed it. Marcus didn't. He swallowed. Every instinct told him to leave, to keep pedaling, to save what little stability he had. No one would blame him. No one would even notice. But he noticed her. He noticed the way her shoulders curled inward, the way her confusion clung to her like the cold. He noticed the loneliness that seemed to emanate from her, quiet but unmistakable. As she fumbled with the pendant around her neck, an old, silver piece worn smooth with age, Marcus saw her hands shaking. She was trying to open it. Trying to find something inside. He stepped closer. "Here," he said softly. "Let me." She looked up at him then. Really looked. Her eyes, pale and glassy, searched his face as though checking for something, danger or kindness, threat or refuge. She nodded. Marcus carefully opened the pendant. Inside, there was a small slip of paper, creased from years of being folded, with an address written in delicate handwriting. 42 Mount Hill Drive. A place that was 2 hours away by bicycle. Mostly uphill. Mostly unforgiving. Marcus felt his heart sink, not from dread, but from the quiet understanding that this moment was demanding something of him. Something costly. He stood there, pendant open in his palm, the cold biting his fingers, the weight of choice pressing into him like winter itself. And in the silence that followed, he realized his life was no longer on the path he had been riding just moments before. Marcus stared at the address inside the pendant, its ink faded slightly as though time itself had been trying to erase it. 42 Mount Hill Drive. He knew the road. Everyone in town did. A long stretch of winding asphalt that climbed the ridge outside Willow Creek, where the winter wind blew unhindered and the nights gathered early. He closed the pendant carefully and looked up at the woman. She seemed even smaller now, as if the cold were slowly folding her into herself. Her breath came in thin, uncertain wisps. "Mount Hill is pretty far from here," Marcus said quietly. "Do you remember how you got to this bus stop?" She shook her head again. Her eyes drifted toward the street, scanning the empty road as though hoping it might suddenly offer answers. But nothing came. Just the quiet hum of winter settling deeper into the evening. Marcus pressed his lips together, feeling that familiar tension tugging at both sides of him. On one hand, he saw the lines of exhaustion on her face, the confusion that clouded her features. She was someone's grandmother. Someone's responsibility. Someone who might be forgotten if he left her standing here. On the other hand, the deadline loomed. The rent. The room. The fragile shelter that kept him from slipping into the kind of uncertainty he saw in her eyes. He imagined arriving back late, seeing the boarding house door locked, his bag waiting outside in the cold. He imagined the disappointment tightening Mr. Holloway's face as he told Marcus, again, that rules were rules. A part of him whispered that he couldn't afford to lose everything for a stranger. Another part, deeper and quieter, whispered that he couldn't afford to lose himself. The woman touched his arm suddenly, so lightly he almost didn't feel it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know I'm keeping you. You must have somewhere to be." There was apology in her voice, but beneath it, a kind of resignation, as if she had grown used to the idea that her needs were too heavy for anyone to carry. Marcus felt something in his chest, something like the slow unfurling of an old ache. He remembered nights as a child when his mother would forget where she'd placed her keys, or lose track of what day it was. How the world would tilt slightly, and he would place a steadying hand on her back until she breathed fully again. Those memories were gentle, fragile, two people leaning on each other because no one else was around to do it. He couldn't leave this woman alone. He knew it even before he admitted it to himself. He exhaled, a long, quiet breath that fogged the air between them. "It's okay," he said. "Really. Let me help you." Her shoulders eased, just barely. "Are you sure? It's getting late." Marcus nodded, though he felt the weight of the night settling onto him. "Yeah. I'm sure." He helped her onto the bicycle's small back rack, steadying her carefully as she held onto his coat. Her grip was as light as paper, yet it felt significant, like she was placing a piece of her trust in his hands. He glanced once more down the road he should have taken. The path that would have gotten him to the delivery on time. The path that held the promise of a warm bed and a locked door that belonged, at least for a little while, to him. Then he looked up toward the distant ridge where Mount Hill waited in the deepening dusk. Choosing the ridge meant choosing uncertainty. Choosing risk. Choosing sacrifice. But it also meant choosing the kind of person he wanted to be. Marcus shifted his weight onto the pedals. "Hold on, ma'am. It's a long ride." She nodded, resting her head lightly against his back in a gesture so trusting it made his throat tighten. And as he pushed off into the dimming evening, the last of the daylight slipping behind the hills, Marcus felt the familiar world he knew, its routines, its rules, its narrow margins, fall away behind him. He was stepping into a choice that would redefine everything, though he didn't yet know how deeply the night would shape what came next. The first stretch of the ride was deceptively gentle, a long, flat road running parallel to the frozen creek, where thin sheets of ice cracked softly beneath the shifting evening air. Marcus pedaled slowly at first, adjusting to the unfamiliar weight behind him. The old bicycle creaked under the strain, protesting each rotation of the wheels, but it moved onward, faithful in its stubbornness. The woman held onto the back of his coat with her fragile hands, her grip trembling slightly with each bump in the pavement. Marcus could feel the cold of her fingers even through the fabric. It made him pedal harder. Neither of them spoke for a while. There was something sacred in the quiet, the kind of silence that forms when two strangers are pulled together by circumstance rather than choice. It was a silence filled with breath, with the rhythm of wheels against road, with the distant sound of wind brushing dry branches along the edges of the path. As the town slipped behind them, Marcus became increasingly aware of how dark the world was becoming. The sun had nearly vanished, leaving a deep blue twilight settling over the fields. The road ahead narrowed between long rows of leafless trees that swayed slightly, their branches reaching like stretched fingers across the sky. He glanced back at her briefly. "You holding up okay?" She lifted her chin enough for him to see her eyes. They were softer now, less filled with confusion, warmed by the presence of someone beside her. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." Two simple words, but they wrapped around Marcus like a fragile blanket. No one thanked him often. Most people barely saw him. Delivery boys were parts of the scenery, faces blurred by hurried routines, names forgotten as soon as the door closed. He pushed through an uphill bend in the road, the incline beginning its slow rise. His breath grew heavier. His thighs burned. The cold wind stung his eyes. He blinked it away and leaned forward, muscles straining with the effort. Halfway up the incline, she spoke again, this time hesitantly, as though plucking words from distant thoughts. "You remind me of someone," she said. "Someone kind. Someone who used to help me find my way when I lost it." There was a tremor in her voice, a blend of memory and sorrow that Marcus felt even without fully understanding. "My name is Marcus," he said quietly, not sure why he felt compelled to offer it, not sure why it mattered, except that she deserved to know who was carrying her through the cold. She let out a soft breath. "Marcus," she repeated, as if testing the shape of it. "That's a good name." The compliment was simple, but it reached him in a way few things had in recent years. He nodded once and kept pedaling, focusing on the rhythmic strain of each push forward. As they crested the hill, the wind grew sharper. It swept through his thin jacket like needles, chilling the sweat on his back. He felt the bicycle wobble under the added resistance. The night deepened around them, the world reduced to the narrow stretch of road illuminated by the faint glow from a distant street lamp. Marcus slowed to catch his breath. "This part gets rough," he said, half apologetic, half warning. "I trust you," she replied. He wasn't sure why those words hit him the way they did, like a warm hand pressed gently against a bruise he'd forgotten was there. Trust was not something freely given in his world, nor something he expected from a stranger. He straightened his back, tightened his grip on the handlebars, and continued upward. The air grew colder as they climbed. Frost gathered at the edges of the road. Every inhale seared his lungs with winter's bite. But with each push of the pedals, every strained rotation, Marcus felt something shift quietly inside him, a resolve that was deeper than rent money, stronger than exhaustion. He had chosen this. And though he didn't know where the night would leave him, he knew this moment, this act, was something he would not turn away from. Behind him, the woman's head rested lightly against his back, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt that he was not alone on the road. The road steepened as the last traces of daylight slipped away completely, leaving only the thin silver of the moon rising through a veil of clouds. Marcus felt the shift in the temperature immediately. The cold seemed to deepen into his bones, threading through his jacket and settling across his shoulders. Each breath came out in harsh bursts, white and fleeting, vanishing into the dark. But he didn't stop. He leaned forward, muscles shaking as he pedaled into the incline. The bicycle groaned under the load, the weight of the hill, the weight of the woman, the weight of his own weariness. Every revolution of the pedals felt like lifting a boulder uphill, yet he pushed on. Behind him, the woman shivered. He felt it through the back of his coat, a small tremor that whispered of the cold. Marcus slowed just enough to turn his head. "You warm enough?" he asked, though the answer was evident in her trembling. She hesitated before responding. "It's colder than I remember," she murmured, voice thin, fragile. "I don't know why it feels so sharp tonight." Marcus swallowed. He knew that kind of cold. The kind that gnaws at a person rather than merely biting them. The kind that reminds you the world is vast and indifferent. He stopped pedaling for a moment, letting the bike roll to the side of the road. His breath was ragged, the cold air scraping at his lungs, but the woman's visible shivering made something stir inside him. "Hold on," he said gently. He got off the bike, unzipped his jacket, and draped it gently around her shoulders. His only jacket. His only real shield against the night. She tried to protest, weakly. "Oh no, you'll freeze," she said, her fingers brushing clumsily at the fabric. "I'll be fine," Marcus replied, though he wasn't sure it was true. But the decision had already been made somewhere deep in him, before he had even opened his mouth. She clutched the jacket around herself with a grateful, trembling sigh. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're very kind." Marcus gave her a small nod, though she couldn't see it in the dark. He rubbed his arms, the cold instantly wrapping around him like a second skin. He mounted the bicycle again, gripping the handlebars tighter to stop his hands from shaking. "All right," he said softly. "Let's keep going." The ride resumed, slower now, wearier, the cold cutting deeper with every passing minute. His fingers felt stiff against the handlebars, as if the cold was turning them into stone. He shifted his weight, trying to keep the bike steady on the uneven road. Ahead, the path narrowed as it wound between tall pine trees. Their dark silhouettes towered above him, their needles whispering as the wind threaded through their branches. The world felt vast and quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the ears like a held breath. Marcus focused on the rhythm of pedaling, on the pain that stretched across his legs, on the burn of cold against his cheeks. He thought of the delivery he was supposed to make. How the clock was surely running out on him now. How rent would be due, and he would have no story to tell except this one, helping a stranger. But he didn't regret it. Not yet. The incline grew steeper again, and Marcus felt the bicycle slowing beneath him. Every few feet, the wheels threatened to slide back. He gritted his teeth and leaned into the motion, using every ounce of strength he had left. "You can let me walk," the woman said suddenly, voice small. "This is too much for you." "No," Marcus said, breathless. "We'll get there. Just hold on." The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere past logic, past fear, past the exhaustion clawing at him. It was the voice of someone determined not to fail at the one thing he knew mattered in this moment, keeping her safe. Minutes stretched long on the hill, longer than any minutes had before. Marcus's vision blurred slightly from fatigue. His chest ached. His feet felt numb inside his shoes. Yet the small weight of her hands clutching his coat gave him a strange, steadying strength. Finally, the hill leveled. Not much, but enough that the bicycle surged forward with a slight release of tension. Marcus let out a shaky breath that almost turned into a laugh, not of joy, exactly, but of relief so sharp it bordered on pain. "You're doing wonderfully," she murmured behind him, her voice soft with admiration. Marcus didn't respond. Not because he didn't want to, but because his throat felt too tight to speak. Instead, he kept pedaling, focusing on the road slowly unwinding ahead of them, mile after mile of cold, dark path that he was determined to cross. He didn't know how long he could last without his jacket. He didn't know if the rent he was losing would send his life spiraling again. But he knew this: he couldn't leave her behind. Not here. Not tonight. That certainty, quiet, stubborn, unadorned, pulled him forward like a thread of warm light through the dark. And so he rode on. The cold became something alive, an unrelenting force crawling up Marcus's spine, settling in the hollows of his bones. His fingers had gone stiff, wooden, almost useless against the handlebars. The world around him blurred into a wash of gray and white, edges trembling in his vision. And for the first time since the old woman asked for help, doubt pushed through him with real weight. He reached the edge of a long, deserted stretch of road on the outskirts of town. The wind tore across the open fields, slashing against him without mercy. There were no houses here. No lights. Just pale grass frozen flat by the winter and a sky the color of tarnished metal. Halfway along that lonely road, the bicycle began to shudder. A strange, sinking sound escaped from the back wheel, like breath being let out of a tired chest. Marcus's heart tightened. He knew the sound even before it happened. The chain slipped. The wheel wobbled. And the bike lurched violently beneath him. He hit the ground so hard that the cold knocked the air from his lungs. He stayed there for a moment, staring up at the empty sky, feeling the sting in his palms and elbows, the dull throb blooming in his knee. It would have been easy to stay there. Just lie back and let the night swallow him. The old woman's words flickered in his mind again, soft as a fading candle. "Just help me get home." But now everything inside him whispered the opposite. "You can't. You've done enough. You're only one person. Let it go." He sat up slowly, groaning as he inspected the bike. The chain was off. One of the spokes had bent. He couldn't ride it again tonight. Maybe not ever. He felt something inside him break, not loudly, but in a quiet, crushing way that made his throat tighten. This wasn't just about the ride. This was every moment in his life when he tried to push forward and the world had pushed harder. Every time hope seemed like a small, foolish thing he carried in his pocket. Every time survival overshadowed faith. He pressed a hand to his forehead, leaning over the broken bike, breath shaking. He had promised her. He had said he wouldn't leave her behind. But now? He was miles from town. The temperature was dropping fast. His delivery was ruined. His bike was crippled. And his body felt near the point of collapse. For the first time that night, Marcus let himself think the unthinkable. Maybe he should turn back. He looked down the empty road stretching endlessly into the cold. A road neither welcoming nor forgiving. And he felt very small, like a single warm breath in a world made of winter. Marcus stayed crouched beside the broken bike, the cold settling over him like a second skin. For the first time since the journey began, the world fell completely still. No cars. No voices. No distant hum of town life. Just the hush of winter breathing against his ears. He bowed his head, letting the silence fold around him. In that stillness, memories surfaced, not loud, not sharp, but gentle and uninvited, drifting through him like snowflakes. He remembered being 8 years old, watching his mother fix the same bike with patient hands, laughing when he fretted over bent spokes and loose chains. "Life breaks things, baby," she'd told him. "But we try anyway. We try because people matter." And then, her final winter. Her voice softer, her hands weaker. Yet still telling him the same thing. Still believing it. A breath escaped him, white and fragile in the cold air. He realized something then, not with drama, not with sudden revelation, but with the quiet understanding that comes when the world stops long enough for truth to rise. He wasn't out here because it was easy. Or because anyone would thank him. He was out here because he couldn't bear the thought of someone waiting alone, believing no one would come. Not after everything he'd lived through. Not after everything life had taken. He lifted his eyes toward the long, frozen road. He didn't know how he would continue. He didn't know how far he could go. But in that brief, breathless quiet, he knew he wasn't done trying. He rose from the frost with a slow, stubborn resolve. The bicycle sat beside him, mangled and mute, a small monument to the night's wear. He pushed it, first a few feet, then a few more, each step a small insistence against the cold. The road narrowed, the dark pressed close. His breath came ragged, his knee a dull, constant memory of the fall. Still, the address in the pendant mapped itself in his head like a single stubborn star, Mount Hill, 42. They walked more than they rode. Marcus guided the bike, the woman leaning on his shoulder when the slope grew steeper, her weight shifting from frail to relied upon. Once, she stopped and set her hand on the bark of a tree as if to steady herself against a forgotten ache, and for a moment the night seemed to soft focus around them. He felt like a child again, steadying his mother, fitting himself into the small heroics of former days. At last, light pooled ahead, an old gate, a long driveway, a house that sat back from the road with a soft, steady glow in its windows. It was the sort of place the town whispered about, well-tended hedges, stone steps, a door that seemed to belong to another season. Marcus's hands trembled as he lifted the knocker. The sound echoed, steady and certain, and footsteps answered from inside. When the door opened, warmth spilled into the night, a wash of lamplight and the scent of something baking, rich and domestic. The woman's eyes widened, confusion and relief braided together. She laughed, a small, surprised sound that made something in Marcus loosen. "Evelyn," she said, as if the name itself found her on the threshold. An older woman, Evelyn Carter, stood inside, hair a careful silver, wearing a cardigan that smelled faintly of lemon and steam. She looked not like the rumors in the grocery aisle but like a grandmother in a storybook, eyes quick and kind. For a moment she just looked at them, taking in the spare, exhausted boy and the small, weathered woman at his shoulder. "Oh," she said, voice steady. "You made it. Come in, please. Come in and warm yourself." They stepped over the threshold. The heat was immediate, a soft thing that filled Marcus's chest with relief he hadn't known he needed. The woman, Evelyn's guest, sat in a chair by the hearth and was handed a blanket and a cup of tea so warm Marcus could feel the steam against his fingers when he took it. Evelyn's hands were practiced and gentle, the kind of hands that knew the economy of small comforts. They spoke in soft, careful phrases, nothing flaring, only the quiet mechanics of remembering names, faces, the simple account of what had happened. Marcus told the story without drama, how the pendant had slipped into his hands, how the road had leaned and how he had promised not to leave. Evelyn listened with a dignity that made him feel, for the first time all night, as if his tired choices mattered. "You did the right thing," she said, and the words were both ordinary and enormous. They did not offer money or promises in that moment, they offered recognition. And recognition felt like light. He stayed only long enough to see the woman safely settled, warm, fed, smiling, until she drifted into a sleep that looked like forgiveness. Evelyn insisted he rest, but Marcus was aware of the hour, of the missed delivery, of the fragile shelter that might close like a trap if he did not return. He stepped back out into the night before long, the door closing behind him with a soft, inevitable click. The walk back to town was slower, lonelier, each footfall a small confession of what he'd chosen and what it had cost. He thought of the room with the peeling wallpaper, of the thin mattress and the window that whistled when the night breathed. He told himself he would be quick. He would explain. He would ask Mr. Holloway for patience, for one night, for mercy. But when he reached the boarding house, the porch light glared like accusation. The front door hung shut and the world outside felt differently arranged, on the stoop, under the awning, lay a small, clear plastic bag. Inside were his few things: a toothbrush, a pair of socks, a battered paperback, the coat he'd given away. The bag looked absurdly small, as if condensing a life into a child's lunch sack might somehow make the life less real. Mr. Holloway stood in the doorway, a silhouette of tired rules and private sorrow. "We gave you notice last week," he said, voice flat but not malicious. "You were late too often." Marcus opened his mouth, the words of explanation rising then falling away. He could point to the broken chain, the woman, the address folded like a secret, but it felt like bargaining with weather. Rules had weight. There was no intention to be cruel in the way Mr. Holloway moved. He was simply the keeper of the boarding house's order, and Marcus had tipped one too many stones in that ordered pile. The lock clicked, and even the sound of it seemed to settle into Marcus's bones. He did not argue. There was a small, civilized dignity in not arguing that he had learned from his mother. He picked up the plastic bag and felt suddenly very tired, not just in his body but deep in the language of life. Where would he go? Mr. Johnson's market was open one more hour. The owner was a man whose face remembered the town's children like a ledger. Marcus walked there, slow, hands empty. He expected nothing, only the small courtesy that sometimes lives in corners of the world that still believe in neighborliness. Mr. Johnson looked at him, pity and stubborn kindness both folding into a single expression. "You can sleep in the storeroom tonight," he said without ceremony. "We've got an old cot back there. Wrap up. I'll lock the door." The storeroom smelled of grain and dust, of canned tomatoes and old wood, oddly like stability. The cot was scratchy but sheltered. Marcus lay down with his jacket still on, the night's events moving through his head in small films: the pendant's paper, the hill's incline, the woman's hands, Evelyn's lamplight. He had lost the room, yes, but he had not lost the imprint of what it felt like to help. He slept in fits and starts, waking to the cold and then to the small, merciful warmth of morning. Mr. Johnson offered him coffee and, as dawn softened the edges of the town, Marcus sat on a crate and drank slowly. He expected the morning to spool out ordinary errands, an apology that would go nowhere, the slow scraping of another day's survival. Instead, a car, an expensive, understated presence, rolled down the street and stopped outside the market. A man in a dark coat stepped out, careful and direct. He carried an air that suggested things were rarely urgent for him, yet something about the way he scanned the stoop, the way he walked with single-minded purpose, made the air sharpen. He introduced himself as Liam, and without unnecessary preamble asked for Marcus Carter, though he said the name with the kind of careful respect that felt like being given a place at a table you hadn't known existed. Marcus blinked. He had not given his full name tonight to anyone except the woman who had slept by Evelyn's hearth. The world, it seemed, had been paying attention in ways he could not yet see. "Evelyn wanted to thank you personally," Liam said. "She asked me to find you." Marcus felt the room narrow to the size of his chest. He imagined the small folding of the pendant, the address, the long walk up the hill, and then the stranger at the doorway who had warmed a cup of tea and offered a word that mattered. Recognition had arrived in the form of a man in a dark coat, with a car that whispered of other seasons. He was careful with his own surprise. The cold of the night was still in his bones. "She's the woman from the bus stop," he said quietly. She's okay?" Liam's eyes were steady. "She is. She asked me to tell you she remembers. She asked me to tell you she is grateful." Those words settled differently than any payment could, like the quiet, right answer to a question he had scarcely allowed himself to ask aloud. The revelation was not just that she was wealthy, though the sheen around Liam hinted at that, it was that someone had seen him and decided his action carried weight. Marcus wrapped his hands around the cup of coffee Mr. Johnson had given him, watching steam rise in the pale morning light. Outside, the town went on, shopkeepers sweeping, the occasional car trailing exhaust. Inside, the storeroom felt like a small island of possible futures, and on that island, a single, strange fact had landed: he had been noticed. He did not yet know how that noticing would translate into the days to come. He only knew the simple shape of the night had changed. The ripple had begun. Marcus stepped outside with Liam, feeling the cold morning air slip beneath his collar like an unfinished sentence. The car waiting at the curb was quiet, polished, the kind of vehicle that didn't seem to belong to roads patched with winter tar. Liam opened the back door as if it were the most natural thing in the world to offer a boy with a plastic bag of belongings a seat cushioned in leather. Marcus hesitated, not out of fear, but out of habit. His life had taught him to double-check generosity, to test the weight of an open door before walking through it. He held the bag a little tighter. "I can follow you," he said. "I've got my bike." Even as he said it, he remembered the chain, the bent frame, the slow collapse of its usefulness sometime around midnight. Liam glanced at the twisted metal still leaning against the market's wall. He didn't smile or pity, he simply understood. "Please," he said. "Let us drive you. She's expecting you." Expecting. The word felt too large for someone like him. Marcus lowered himself into the car. The seat held his tired bones in a way he wasn't accustomed to, soft without being fragile, warm against his cold jacket. The world outside the window moved in quiet shapes as they drove, frost dissolving into puddles, chimneys releasing thin threads of smoke, shop signs turning over to open as though they'd been trained to wake with the sun. Liam didn't fill the ride with chatter. He offered small, thoughtful information only when necessary. "She woke early this morning," he said. "She asked for you by name." Marcus looked out at the road. "Did she remember everything? Last night, I mean." She seemed confused at the bus stop. "She has good days and bad days," Liam replied gently. "But last night, she remembered what mattered. She remembered you." The words pressed quietly into the space between them, neither heavy nor light, simply true. When they reached the long driveway, Marcus recognized the stone pillars from the night before. In daylight they looked different, less like the edges of a storybook and more like the borders of a life he could never imagine living in. The house rose beyond them, dignified but not flashy, its windows catching the morning light like softened gold. He stepped out slowly. His shoes touched the gravel with a small crunch that felt like intruding. Liam led him to the front steps, but stopped before the door. "She asked to speak with you alone," he said. Marcus swallowed. His breath made a small ghost in the air as he exhaled. Inside, Evelyn Carter sat near the same hearth he had seen the night before. She wasn't dressed in anything elaborate, just a wool sweater and soft house slippers, but something about her posture carried a lifetime of practiced grace. She looked up the moment he entered, as if she'd been listening for his footsteps, waiting for their rhythm. "There you are," she said, her voice warm like the touch of a shawl. "I worried you'd slipped away before I had the chance to thank you." Marcus shook his head. "No, ma'am. I didn't want to bother you." She gestured for him to sit, and he did, perching on the edge of a chair like someone afraid to sink too deeply into comfort. "Do you know," she said softly, "that in all my years, I've learned most people do the right thing only when it is easy? And some do it when it is difficult, but with the hope of reward. Very few," she paused, as if searching through memory itself. "Very few do what you did. At great cost. With no expectation of gain." Marcus looked down at his hands, still chapped from the cold. "Anyone would have helped her." "No," Evelyn said gently. "They didn't." There was no accusation, only a truth spoken lightly enough to land without bruise. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with an expression both kind and assessing, like she was learning the shape of something remarkable but fragile. "Marcus," she said, "Liam told me where he found you this morning. At the market. He said you lost your room last night." Her voice faltered slightly, not with pity, but with quiet hurt, as if his reality pressed against something tender in her. Marcus cleared his throat. "It was my fault. I was late. I should have planned better." "You chose someone else's safety over your own," she murmured. "That is not failure. That is character." He didn't have an answer to that. Character felt like an oversized coat draped across shoulders too narrow to hold it. Evelyn folded her hands. "I would like to help you. Not as charity. Not as repayment. Her eyes softened. But as acknowledgement. Of who you have already shown yourself to be. Marcus's pulse quickened with confusion. Offers often came with hidden ribs, conditions, expectations, hooks. He had grown used to scanning people the way others scanned receipts. She continued, her tone steady, if you're willing, I'd like you to stay here for a while. A guest. With a warm bed. Hot meals. No rent clock ticking above your head. Marcus blinked at the generosity wrapped in such simple language. The thought of sleeping in a real bed felt almost indecent. And, she added quietly, I'd like you to return to school. Properly. With support. A scholarship in your name. The room tilted, gently, as though the universe had rearranged its furniture without asking permission. He inhaled slowly. Ms. Carter. I'm not used to people offering things like that. His voice trembled before he could stop it. I never helped you for anything in return. I don't want you to think. She interrupted softly. I know why you helped. That is precisely why the offer stands. He looked at the fire, the way it moved in slow, deliberate waves, like a memory of warmth rather than heat itself. A part of him, old, weary, practiced in disappointment, whispered caution. Another part, smaller but stubborn, whispered possibility. He tightened his grip on the plastic bag of his belongings. The sight of it, crinkled, transparent, holding the fragile edges of his life, made the choice almost unbearable. Finally, he lifted his eyes. I just don't want to be a burden, he said. Evelyn smiled, and the gentleness in it felt like a door opening. Oh, Marcus. You are not a burden. You are a beginning. The word settled into him, warm and frightening, as if someone had lit a lantern in a dark room he'd lived in for years. He didn't say yes. Not yet. But for the first time, he didn't say no. And that, perhaps, was the beginning of agreement. Marcus stayed in the quiet warmth of Evelyn Carter's home that first morning, watching the soft light fall across the polished floors, the books neatly lined on shelves, the walls holding years of care and attention. He had spent much of the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about the broken bike, the hill, the cold, and the woman he had helped. And now, here he was, being offered something he had scarcely imagined, a chance not to merely survive, but to build, to grow, to belong. Evelyn approached him gently, carrying a cup of tea, and sat across from him by the fire. Marcus, she said, this is not charity. You earned this by who you are, not what you've done for me alone. And I'd like to help you make something bigger, something lasting. Marcus's fingers tightened around the cup. He could feel the heat seeping through, anchoring him. I don't know if I deserve it, he said quietly. The words felt strange on his tongue, hesitation and humility mingled in a way that was almost painful. You do, she replied simply. But it isn't just about what you deserve. It's about what you can create. I want to help you start a foundation, a place that reaches young people like you, and elderly people like Mrs. Carter, people who need a hand and a chance to be seen. Marcus looked down at the cup again. A foundation. The words felt enormous. His mind flickered through months of struggle, cold nights sleeping in a cot, long deliveries through winter streets, the aching solitude of being alone in the world. And now, the possibility of changing that pattern for others, of building something meaningful, seemed almost too large to grasp. Evelyn's gaze met his, patient and steady. We'll call it the Golden Light Fund, she said. A place where one act of kindness can ripple outward. Where a small choice, like yours last night, can transform lives. Marcus exhaled slowly. The idea began to take shape in his chest. Small at first, like a flicker of hope he had carried all along, but growing stronger, brighter. He imagined young people, tired and overlooked, finding a place where they could belong. He imagined elderly people, like Mrs. Carter on the bus stop, being met with care and warmth. And he realized that he could help create that reality. Yes, he said finally, voice low but firm. I'll do it. I want to help. And with that single word, the trajectory of his life shifted. No longer defined by survival alone, Marcus began to step into the possibilities of contribution, responsibility, and leadership. Over the following months, Evelyn guided him through the legal and practical steps of founding the Golden Light Fund. Marcus worked tirelessly, designing programs, meeting with volunteers, visiting communities, listening to the stories of young people and the elderly alike. Every interaction reminded him of the night he had chosen to help someone, despite the cost to himself. And slowly, the small act rippled outward. A young teen received a scholarship that allowed her to continue school, an elderly man found consistent companionship in the programs Marcus helped organize, and the town began to see the quiet power of compassion, modeled by a boy who had once been invisible. Marcus sometimes returned to that old bus stop on his bicycle, the same route he had taken on the coldest night of his life. The place seemed unchanged, yet he saw it differently now, not as a point of hardship, but as the origin of a journey that had reshaped everything. The Golden Light Fund became more than a name, it became a living testament to the choice he had made, a promise that small acts, done with dignity and care, could expand into something immeasurable. And Marcus understood, finally, that transformation was not a single event, but a series of decisions, moments, and quiet commitments, and that the ripple of one hand extended farther than he had ever imagined. Years later, Marcus would still ride past that same bus stop. The cold asphalt, the worn wooden sign, the thin strip of light along the edge of the road, they all carried a quiet echo of that night. He didn't stop, usually, but he allowed himself a slow glance, a small nod to the place where one choice had set everything into motion. He thought of the night sky, of frost on the hills, of the way trust had settled into his hands when he offered it without expectation. He thought of Evelyn, of the young people who now walked through the doors of the Golden Light Fund, of the elderly who found comfort and dignity where there had once been neglect. A single act, he realized, could carry far more weight than anyone could predict. A hand reached out in kindness could become a chain of warmth, a network of hope, a legacy that pulsed quietly through time. Marcus smiled softly, feeling the rhythm of his own life pulse in tandem with the lives he had touched. The world was still hard. The cold still came, sometimes unexpectedly. But the act of choosing to do good, even in small ways, had changed the trajectory of everything that followed. And as he rode onward, wind brushing his face, Marcus carried the quiet certainty that connection, compassion, and courage, though often unseen, were the true measure of a life well lived. One hand had reached another. One choice had begun a ripple. And in that simple, human truth, the world felt immeasurably lighter. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.